Hello and welcome to Tifo IRL, our new channel, Tifo but in real life. I'm Alex, I'm an analyst for Tifo, and today we're going to be talking about Spain. We're going to go through some of how they attack, some of how they defend, and a couple of the weaknesses. Also looking at one or two of the squad selections. Before we start, just to encourage you to subscribe to this new channel and support what we're doing here. There's going to be loads and loads of Euros content during that tournament, and then we'll carry on afterwards. So if you like this kind of video and you like seeing us move dots around and so on to try and explain football tactics to you, please get behind the channel, subscribe, like the videos, leave comments, and so on. So let's look at Spain. So Spain obviously were one of the dominant forces in world football around a decade ago. They won the 2008 Euros, they won the 2012 Euros, and that sandwiched a World Cup victory in 2010. It's fair to say that since then things have been less successful for them. They haven't got past a round of 16 since that 2012 tournament, and obviously the most recent World Cup disintegrated slightly into a farce when Julian Lopetegui got sacked on the eve of the tournament because he'd arranged a job with Real Madrid and hadn't told anybody. So Fernando Hierro had to come in and take over. Spain now have a greater degree of solidity. They are led in the dugout by Luis Enrique, who was the last guy to take Barcelona to a Champions League title. They're also in a period of transition with regards to players. So obviously the big headline news from the Spain squad selection is that Sergio Ramos is not playing. But also there are a number of other younger players that are coming through and starting to establish themselves as really, really crucial to what Luis Enrique is doing. Spain's function is still very much a kind of keep possession, work it through the lines 4-3-3, but Luis Enrique has used some of these younger players to integrate a bit more verticality, a bit more pace, kind of modernized the system a little bit. This is probably here going to be Spain's starting lineup. There's a couple of these players that we can be relatively certain will start the big games. So this front three of Dani Olmo, Alvaro Morata and Ferran Torres, very much the first choice, and we've seen how effective they can be in the 6-0 win against Germany. They do have options though, so Adama Traore can come in here and play on this right-hand side and add a lot more pace and ball carrying. That can be quite effective. And also through the centre, Gerard Moreno, who won the Europa League with Villarreal, is a very, very useful striker who can drop off, link play, and can also play through the wide positions and allow Spain, for example, to use effectively two strikers in this system here, should they want to do that. As we go further back through the midfield, again, this central midfield three, Rodri is likely to be the anchor, but you could very easily swap out Rodri for Sergio Busquets and still have the same sort of functionality and build-up. Rodri's just perhaps a little more physical, adds a little bit more at set pieces. Koke, very versatile player here. He's going to be moving around here a lot. We'll talk about this more when we do the build-up, and Thiago will drop off and add his passing. But if Spain want a little bit more pace, a little bit more ball carrying, then it's possible to bring in here, for example, Pedri, the young Barcelona player who's made such an impression this season. He can add a bit more directness. Or Fabian, who's at Napoli, again, very, very good range of passing and will be able to get forwards a little bit. So Spain have versatility in that midfield, which adds to their options. At left back, Jordi Alba, almost guaranteed to start. Jose Gaia, who's from Valencia, can play in that position as well, but Alba's pretty much guaranteed. Right back is an interesting area for Spain. Marcos Llorente, who's the Atletico Madrid what would you call him? Almost a utility player, although that kind of slightly undervalues him. He has played as a central midfielder, he's played as a right winger, he's played as a shadow striker, but for Spain, he's tended to play as a right back. The only other natural right back in the squad is Chelsea's Cesar Azpilicueta. But Llorente has started the big games recently. On the left-hand side of central defence here, Aymeric Laporte, but again, if you want, you can pick Pau Torres there, who adds passing, adds a bit of ball progression. But Laporte is probably a slightly more solid defender. And then on the right-hand side, it's likely to be Eric Garcia, but Diego Llorente of Leeds has a shout there. And in goal, Unai Simon has started the big games recently. He's probably a better passer of the ball than his opposite number, David De Gea, who has also not had a great season for Manchester United. So that's what we think probably Spain's starting 11 will be. We're going to have a look now at how Spain build up and how they attack, and we'll go back to the board for that. Spain will play in a 4-3-3. That much is pretty guaranteed. They are still very much a patient, possessional team, building through the lines, working it out through the defenders, progressing the ball in quite fixed patterns. But Luis Enrique has added this degree of verticality, pace out wide, and that makes Spain a bit more dangerous in transition, particularly transition obviously from defence to attack, counter-attacking. This was really, really evident against Germany, where the fact that Spain could get quick runners in behind quite a high German line really, really ripped Germany apart. In terms of how they build up at the back, so this back four is going to do pretty much what you'd expect from a kind of top level team that plays a 4-3-3. So the centre backs will split wide. The pivot defensive midfielder will drop here. And they'll initially look to progress it through the goalkeeper, have this kind of, passing diamond here that allows them to circulate and rotate the ball. The fullbacks will be part of that as well. And the fullbacks won't initially press particularly high. As Spain progress the ball higher up the pitch, then things change ever so slightly. What you'll then start to see is the creation almost of a kind of 2-4-4 shape. So let's have the opposition guy faffing about there. This defensive midfielder here, Rodri or Busquets, will drop into one of these sides. And then probably Thiago on the right side of the central midfield too will also drop back. And that's where you get this kind of 4 here, you get a 2 here like this. And then Koke will move up and start trying to play kind of in this either left half space or possibly even pushing up into the 10 slot. Morata will make room for that to happen, and then you'll have this kind of 4 shape here. Now, what's really important with this is that Spain want to do 2 things at the same time. They want to maintain the solidity of their build-up as the ball progresses here. They want to be able to keep possession. That's partly a defensive move, obviously. The less the opposition have the ball, the less the opposition can threaten them. But it's also then to start generating movement between the lines, particularly from Morata and Koke, up and down, and also from these wide attackers, but more in and out. So once the ball moves out into the wide areas, once Spain have been able to kind of push up the pitch with this very patient, very controlled passing between a kind of back 6 and the front 4 are then making their movements, what you start to see is this acceleration and this verticality. This is, again, similar to other kind of good top-tier 4-3-3 sides that we've seen. And this is one of the things about international football tactics, is that the better the team, in some ways, the more similar the tactics, because you start relying on individual quality and you don't need to really work so hard on making your system the thing that will give you the edge. And Spain have got lots of really good attacking players. And Spain have lots of good attacking players. So in Dani Olmo here, we have a left winger who has actually operated throughout his career often as a 10. So there's a kind of natural tendency here to cut in field, occupy this kind of left half space area. And that's very useful for Spain, because in Jordi Alba, they have a fullback who gets really, really high and acts almost as a kind of auxiliary winger. He can also cut in field if Olmo does maintain the width, or sometimes you'll have Koke drifting out to that side so Alba can cut in. But what we get is this kind of creation of a passing triangle here on the left-hand side, again with players that can crop up in different places, who can make runs in behind, who can overlap, deliver crosses from dangerous areas, and that makes Spain really, really effective on the left. One of the reasons that this is helpful is because it also, as we've already kind of helpfully shown here, has this tendency of dragging the opposition over. And that's really good for Spain because Ferran Torres, who is the opposite-sided winger, is much more of an orthodox winger. So he will like to get forwards, he can cross in and he will do that sometimes, but it's these runs here, it's these penetrating runs in behind that are most effective for Torres. And he did this a couple of times against Germany and got a couple of goals off it. Because Spain create these triangles over here, and because people are naturally cautious about Alba's ability to overlap, and also crucially because Marcos Llorente, as a kind of converted central midfielder, can step up here and bulk this area out, and that affords Torres a lot of protection. These blindsided runs become a really, really good way of Spain attacking. So expect to see quite a lot of congestion on this side, trying to keep this right-hand side open and these penetrating runs in. The role of Morata is interesting. Yeah, he's quite a good kind of creative forward. The sort of guy who will link play, so he can play up here, on the shoulder of the defender, take these vertical passes in here, say from Rodri, and then lay the ball off. As he does that, Morata will then be looking to spin in behind, get here to take a return pass. Similarly, if the ball is out wide and Alba is here on the overlap, you can expect to see Morata making these runs in here and trying to get forwards. He's quite a good aerial presence, so he offers Spain a kind of dual threat, aerially, but also in terms of linking up play and bringing these other players in. It is worth noting that Spain do actually shoot quite a lot from deep. And that's because partly teams will drop off against them because Spain are really good at playing through the lines. One of the easiest ways to deny that is to just make sure that there's almost no space between the lines. Let's get rid of that errant one there. What that does is it kind of restricts Spain sometimes. So one of the issues that they have is the conversion of chances. They'll create a lot of chances, they'll have a lot of the ball, but if they're shooting from these kinds of areas, it's not always optimal for them. And that's one of the reasons why Spain are actually, in some ways, most dangerous when they're playing least like Spain, because when they're transitioning at pace, let's drag everything back here. When they're transitioning at pace and they're able to catch the opposition with a bit of space in behind, then suddenly these direct runners, these quick runners in behind become really, really dangerous. And that's what we saw against Germany. The ability of Spain to get the ball forwards quickly to runners making runs in. And that's why Spain have become more dangerous playing in transition than they previously were before Luis Enrique took over. No, Luis Enrique. And that's why Spain have become a bit more dangerous playing in transition than they were before Luis Enrique took over. He's added that verticality, that pace and running in behind. Having said that, do still expect to see this kind of patient build up from the back, this creation of the 2-4-4, lots and lots of movement with Morata and Koke dropping off and pushing up, the wide players moving in, moving out. That will be, generally speaking, what Spain do. And that's partly because it's what they'll have to do, because a lot of the teams that Spain come up against will sit back, they will stop up the middle area. They will try and restrict the amount of space that Spain have. And that's also why the role of these centre-backs bringing the ball forwards, the whole team moving up, is so important. So that's how Spain attack. Let's have a quick look now at how they defend. So there's two key points to the way that Spain defend. The first, as you'd expect, is that they keep a really, really high line. Again, that's kind of slightly determined by the fact that if the centre-backs cross over the halfway line, then this is kind of fair game for passes in behind. But they will try and keep as high line as possible without being completely suicidal, because it allows them to compress the space and that facilitates the other part of their game, which is really important, which is their pressing. Before we look at the pressing though, it is worth noting that even as Spain fall back into a mid-block, it's quite an aggressive mid-block. You're not going to see really Spain dropping all the way back to this sort of area unless they absolutely have to. And this is because it's almost more important for them to maintain their press and be able to compress the pitch and play high up it than it is to be defensively solid and fall back. The pressing is important because Spain, as you'd expect from a team with these sorts of players, is really vigorous counter-pressing side. So if they lose possession, what you can expect to see is the players that are nearest the ball going towards it, and then Spain taking up quite an aggressive kind of man-orientated press here, stepping ahead of their opposition players or getting really quite close to them to try and force errors. Now that's partly because they know that if the ball comes forward here like this, then they've got these defenders here that can sweep it up, or even if it goes all the way through to Simon, he can then kind of collect it and carry it forward slightly. And he's a good playmaker in that regard, and his range of passing is excellent. But it also means that Spain's counter press, if successful, then has a lot of players that can get up into attacking positions. And so, as with most counter-pressing teams, this surrounding of the ball not only is defensively sensible because it kind of pressures this player, maybe forces them to play it back or into a mistake, or forces them to clear it long, but it also means that the team winning the ball back then has a number of players nearby for quick counter-attacking. And again, this is something that's important to Spain because teams are going to sit off against them. And it's going to be hardest for them to break those teams down when they're moving the ball forward slowly and patiently. And this counter-pressing is going to be particularly useful for Spain because, as we've said, teams will sit deep against them. They'll try and congest the space in the central areas, and Spain will have to try and profit from these counter-pressing opportunities because otherwise they're going to come up against a really organised defence. And teams are least organised when they're thinking about what to do with the ball they've just won back. So this is important for Spain. There's a couple of other things to note. If you look at this sort of back four block that you'll have Spain in, if the ball's on, let's say the ball's on this side of the pitch here, this winger will probably push up and they'll try to make a bit more of a 4-4-2 on this side. And again, that will then allow space on the opposite flank for attacks to come back. So if they win the ball back here, they may not immediately transition to this side. They might quickly try to switch it. And because they've tucked in, this winger and this fullback are going to be in space here. So where is Spain defensively vulnerable? Well, the vulnerabilities mostly come from this high line that we've talked about. And again, this is the kind of classic downside of teams that want to play high up the pitch and congest the space, and teams that have very aggressive fullbacks. If these fullbacks are high up the pitch here supporting attacks, even if Llorente's sort of tucked in a little bit, we can expect Spain to kind of look something like this. And what that means is that if the ball is turned over, all of a sudden, these, even with Rodri here, these centre-backs are really quite exposed. And quick passes here will put players into space. And there's going to be a lot of space in these areas here behind the fullbacks. That's going to be particularly the case on the left-hand side because, as we've said, Alba is a more aggressive left-back. He's looking to get forwards for crossing opportunities. On the right-hand side, Ferran Torres maintains the width a little bit more. Llorente tucks in. So it's less of an issue on Spain's right, but teams that target this left-hand side will potentially profit just because there's so much space in behind. There's also an issue, again, if teams are playing out from the back here more deliberately. If this press is very aggressive here, and that involves Alba stepping up, what that means is that if the pass is able to beat Alba, or if Alba tries to nip in front here to get the pass and doesn't quite do it, again, that's an opportunity for teams to get in behind Spain. And the last thing Spain want is to have two backpedaling centre-backs with a host of players running at them. But that is the trade-off that you make. If you want to play this kind of aggressive possessional style, if you want to compress the space and own possession and own the pitch, you are going to expose your centre-backs. And so Spain are making the classic kind of trade-off for dominant teams that want to play in this style. So that's Spain. We've looked at how they attack, we've looked at how they defend, a couple of the weaknesses. Spain are a really good side, and they should, I think, comfortably get out of the group, even though Joe has told me to say that they won't. Once they've got past that point, quarterfinals looks like a reasonable expectation for them. There are lots of strong teams in this competition, and it's difficult to know, whether Spain's lack of depth in the defensive area will ultimately be a problem. But going forwards, they're going to be a match for anybody, as they showed against Germany. So thanks very much for watching. Like I say, if you've enjoyed this and you've enjoyed this style of video, then please subscribe to the new channel, Tifo IRL, Tifo but in real life, and we'll have loads more Euros content for you coming out shortly.